Mhm.
And during the interview process, we're all people. And I would say it's kind of like interviewing is kind of like dating. There are red flags, yellow flags, which you can choose to acknowledge or you can choose to ignore. But usually those you choose to ignore come bite you later afterwards.
Welcome to another exciting episode of Product Unfiltered. Today we have a very special guest joining us, Jennifer Liu, a product management executive and a career coach with over 20 years of experience in B2B and B2C startups, as well as diverse roles at Google. Her recent positions include Senior Vice President of Product at Lattice and Chief Product Officer at Ethos Life. At Google, she served as a senior director of product, overseeing various areas including internal productivity, payments, mobile, search, AR, VR, and many more. As a career coach, Jennifer draws on her expertise in product management and executive leadership to help individuals excel in their careers. We're really grateful to have Jennifer on our podcast today. Thank you so much, Jennifer, for taking out your time.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
Thank you so much. And Jennifer, before we dive into the product management experiences and advice from you, would love to understand more about your journey into product management. How did you start? What were some important milestones which were in your career? And what are you currently doing?
All right. Well, we're in the beginning. So I grew up in Silicon Valley in the San Francisco Bay Area. So you could say I was surrounded by tech. I think most of my friends' parents were in tech or involved in tech to some degree. And so that's always been a part of my roots. Though I didn't actually always know what product management was. I didn't even know. It's not like you say, I want to grow up to be a product manager. Now it's a little bit more prevalent. But back then it was either engineer, maybe doctor, lawyer, kind of like some of the core professions. And so I grew up thinking, okay, well, I want to be an engineer. Why? Because my dad was an engineer. So I don't know, sounds good. I'll be an engineer. There wasn't too much thought behind that. I did end up going to MIT and studying computer science. Loved the problem solving, also the attention and kind of debugging and figuring out and going like, aha, look at what I built. I really liked that. Though I also had my eye on, I wanted to also include a softer side of things, like the business side or thinking about things more holistically, and go beyond coding and building the product as well to kind of see the full picture. Though I didn't know what that meant. And so actually when I started, it was a bit of a kind of a bit of an anecdotal where I stumbled upon the associate product manager program at Google. And upon a whim, I think it was one Christmas day, I ended up applying and thinking, well, I'll try for it. It's in California. And that's where I started. I was a computer science major, and did a few internships in engineering, knew literally nothing about product management. When I started, my boss I remember talking to him and I was like, what's a PRD? I literally did not know anything. Somehow I got hired, and I started from there. And through there, grew my journey to senior director and then head of product at a couple startups.
That's so
Well,
inspiring, Jennifer. In fact, something which I'm really intrigued about your journey is you were a CS engineer, you went into product, and you went into product around 17 years back. So how was the product management landscape at that point of time? Like we know it's a hot shot thing right now, but I'm not sure if how relevant or how popular was product management back then.
I see. So, needless to say, there was not as much onboarding material
Mhm.
or training or even content like this that was available. And I did not know what I was doing. Literally, I did not know like much about product management except okay, I'm like maybe the CEO of a product, but I just graduated. So what does that mean? How am I supposed to be CEO of a product? Uh, and I think the key thing early on in your career is to be flexible and adaptable. And
Mhm.
that's what I leaned on early in my career. I literally wrote a 100-page PRD thinking, okay, you want me to write the requirements? I'll write every detail that till this day nobody has read. Then I went, that didn't work. Okay, let me write a shorter version. Okay, but then when I switched to different areas, I switched to billing and payments. They're like, oh no, we need all the detail. We need to know what the banks like, how to do the checksums. What do we need? Okay, more detail. But then when I worked on, let's say, search, it was a lot more about experimentation, metrics, less around every single and more around the UI. It was the attention to the detail. And so you really I learned to adapt. And that was part of also the benefit of the APM program. Actually, because we didn't know anything, we inherently were adapting to whatever works. And it was more of the mentality of whatever it takes to get something done. Does it have to be this framework? Does it have to be this document or this template? No, whatever it takes to get stuff done. And if I need to write a help center article, fine. If I need to sit in office hours, fine. Whatever it takes to get something done and to adapt as I go along.
Mm-hmm. Well, Jennifer, that's so great to know, because in today's scenario, I would say Google's APM program is one of the very famous entry gate for aspiring product managers. But let's start from there, because it's very rare to see people starting from APM program climbing the ladder up to senior director. So we would love to know, how was your journey when you started as an APM, if you remember anything about the interview process, because now it's way more structured and there are a lot of rounds which people need to go through. So if we can start from there, how was the interview process? What were your initial days as an APM there?
I see. All right. Well, without exposing my age, because it has been a while since I interviewed. I remember the interview process, and this was also considering, I guess, back in the day. It was a combination of different kind of more exercise of questions. I remember I had a question around, how do you design an alarm clock for the elderly? And that was something that I never thought about before, certainly never studied in college. So I went with it and started talking and figuring it out. And I think that's also what they're looking for. It's that mentality of, yes, you may not have done it before, but are you intimidated by that? And will you just kind of go with it and go, okay, well, I have a problem. How do I figure it out? What's your thinking process? How do you break it down? And so that's the most important. I think the main thing is to not get intimidated. I mean, at least when I remember I was interviewed, I remember a lot of folks, I was like, whoa, I don't know. But at the end of the day, they're people too. They were probably once in your shoes too. And so just remember, as you're having an interview, it's easy to sometimes view the interviewer as somebody of authority, but they're a person as well. And have a conversation with them. Maybe you have the experience, maybe you don't, but you can figure it out and just jump in and start figuring out, okay, well, this is how would I think about this problem? Let's try to solve the problem together, rather than being self-conscious or intimidated by the situation.
Yeah. And Jennifer, tell us more about your early days as an APM. What were some roles and responsibilities which you were working on, and maybe some insights on the products which you were working on? What your contributions in the complete product life cycle?
So I actually started in internal systems. At least when it was called internal systems back then. So this is tools for internal employees to use. We had a project database, PDB, performance management tools that were built in-house internally, even recruiter HR tools like Google HR or ATS, or offer workflow oriented tools. So lots of internal tools. I'll be honest, I did not expect to work on internal tools when I graduated. And even when I told friends, oh, I'm at Google, like, oh, what are you working on? Google Maps, Google Image Search, like internal tools. They're like, oh, okay, great. But I actually learned a ton. I learned a ton because also the target users would come find me if I didn't do a good job. The recruiters were really good at finding you, and the executives were even better at finding you when they needed something. And so it really honed okay, I really need to do a good job. I need to think about the people side of how they'll use the product, as well as the idealistic product side. A perfect example was my biggest mistake that I made was enforcing hard deadlines in the performance management tool. Needless to say, there was a lot of actually executives who then came, can you upload this in the back end? Can you do something? And I went, oh, this was the worst mistake ever. So I learned that there's technology and then there's people. And to really think about the two side by side and thinking through, okay, how will somebody really actually use the product? And what are even unintentional things that may happen with people as they use the product as well?
Mhm. Jennifer, you touched the right point that in the product space, there are two important aspects to it. One would be the technology and one would be the people. I would also love to know how was your roles and responsibilities evolving when you moved from APM to a PM role? Were there different expectations or the expectations increased drastically from an APM to a PM role, or how was the transition been?
I think sometimes people think that when there's a transition, there's like a moment where suddenly you're like, I am an PM1 and your whole life changes. Everybody looks at you differently. It was a bit of, yay, I got promoted. And then, okay, I got to keep keep doing the work. So I think that's the case actually with most promotions. There's a lot of hard work, but you keep doing it, or you keep moving forward. Less of a drastic change. For myself, keep in mind that Google was also growing rapidly. I joined Google back in around 2004. And so Google was growing rapidly. At the same time, I was also progressing in my career and also trying out different areas. I went from internal systems. I tried out billing and payments. I wanted to work on mobile. This was before the iPhone, before the Android, so a little while ago. And I was learning about different areas as well. And so that combined, I didn't actually see a huge transition of, APM to PM1 per se. It was more so that sometimes my role would change. Even I rotated to different areas. I decided to try out mobile. And so with those transitions, I think was a larger change. And then myself, the growth came more gradually. It's not like once you get the title, you suddenly change the way you work.
Yeah.
A lot of it is incremental as you learn what works. And again, that adaptability, especially early on in your career, there are tools and available kind of references, but ultimately it comes down to what is it going to take to drive clarity and to build a good product. And how you get there, there's multiple ways to get there. And so to retain that adaptability early on.
And Jennifer, like as we are talking about your early career at Google, being an APM as well as a PM, so what are some challenges which you see early career professionals face in the product management domain? And what tips would you give to these individuals to tackle these challenges?
I see. And more so, I'm assuming at the IC level.
Yeah.
Okay. I think it's evolved over time. I think for myself, because I joined the APM program, there wasn't much expectation that we knew much about prior background about product or had an MBA of any sort. And so therefore, we all just tried out different things and figured out what works. The good thing about nowadays is that there's a ton of frameworks, content, material. I've spent more like 2 decades in product management. I don't know all the frameworks that are out there. It's every day I hear another, did you hear about this framework? You're like, no, I haven't heard about it, but that sounds useful. Keep in mind that frameworks are just a tool. Even things like OKRs are just a tool. And sometimes early on, you may not be able to, or it may be harder to influence a significant organizational change, such as getting everybody to do OKRs at a company. That's maybe a much larger endeavor to be able to instrument. Possible, but may take longer. But you could take the principles of OKRs. You could take the principles of, well, how do I make sure there's alignment with leadership as to what are the expectations? Make sure there's that visibility, make sure that we have clear goals and that we are measuring the outcomes and not just the launches. I think all those are the core elements. And so the pitfalls not pitfalls, but some of the challenges that sometimes I see with product managers today is that because there are all these tools and great frameworks, they go, well, I have to use this because I heard this in a podcast, or I need to use that. And it's good as reference, but at the end of the day, you need to adapt it to your situation, to even yourself, and figure out what works for you and your team to be able to deliver a product the best. And also, what do you have control over? And what do you not? And considering that, figure out, okay, well, how do I then navigate this particular situation?
Mhm. So also talk to us about a bit about, since you were there as senior director too, so you might have recruited a lot more PMs during your tenure. So what would be an ideal approach according to Jennifer if she had to interview someone for an APM role? What type of interviews would you love to have?
What type of person would I hire?
Yeah.
Okay. So I would say as a principal, and this is actually independent of level, whether it's a junior level, mid-level, or senior level, I look for somebody with operating range. And this is especially important, I would say, at startups, but also at large companies as well. What I mean by that, and this is actually borrowed from Sukhinder Singh. She had an entire talk. She's an ex-Googler. She had an entire talk about what she looks for. And I remember getting inspired by that video. And she talked about somebody who can fly high, think about the big picture, and also dive deep and go through the details, look at the metrics, and work closely with the team on it. And no matter what level, it's important to have that operating range. As a APM, I was still responsible for the product, and not just what to build for the product, but sometimes even if the product made sense to build, and being able to think at that high level as well as the low level. And even at senior levels, there are senior folks who are like, oh, I'm just going to say 10x. We need to think bigger. But they're not able to dive in because it's just been a while. And so I think somebody who is not afraid to roll up their sleeves, but who's also able to take a step back and think, well, is what I'm doing actually making sense? Where is the market going? How is this product going to evolve beyond the incremental steps that I'm currently making right now?
That's really helpful, Jennifer. So now let's also touch base on your journey post Google. Like, what made you transition to Ethos Life and Lattice, and how was your experience there? What type of learnings from Google actually help you to make better products or lead better product teams there? A bit more about on that.
So it took me a while to leave Google, needless to say. I was there for a long time, close to 17 years. I made 4 kids during that time as well. And I actually think sometimes it's harder the longer you stay because it feels like the stakes are higher. What if it doesn't work out? And it's almost like a fear of what will others think if it doesn't work out like I thought, or it's not an immediate success. And whereas when you're younger, it's like, okay, well, I'm just going to try things and see what works. And so part of the big mentality shift was, well, what's the biggest risk? What's the worst case that can happen? And as a mom of 4 kids, is it too late for me to join a startup? After 17 years at Google, can I work at a startup? And I did get a lot of those questions. And for me, it was overcoming those questions from others as well as myself and saying, you know what? I am continuing to grow. I want to push myself. And personally, I think startups is something that for many of my peers, they were at startups early in their career. For me, I had children early. And so given that, I always wanted to kind of experience that startup environment. And so I thought, well, it's not too late. I don't know, I'm older, but I'm not that old. I still got life in me yet. And so with that, I made the leap to Ethos Life. And then following with that with Lattice. And both of those were different experiences, but I would say I learned a ton that has now helped me in what I'm doing today with coaching. And if not for those experiences, I honestly don't think I would be able to coach or mentor and support as many people as I would without that experience. And so I learned about kind of the chaos of, yes, big organizations, but also with startups, how there's sometimes a lack of foundation with even people knowing what level am I, or what does it take to get to the next level? What is the next level? Are you defining the next level as we speak and figuring that out? And also how much culture is critical at a startup from a leadership standpoint. As a Google, there's a strong culture as well, but it's also just inherently bigger. And so there's a lot more people and even mobility within Google. And so really thinking through those key factors and now supporting what I'm doing today with coaching.
That's so much insight, Jennifer, in this discussion. And that brings me to this question, which me and Rahul usually discuss. What is the optimal career path when you are early in your career? For example, like for individuals like me and Rahul who are just about to start the product journey, a dilemma always is, should we start our career in a big tech company like the Googles, the Microsofts, or should we focus on joining an early stage startup, or maybe a startup where we can get more experience, more responsibilities? So that's a dilemma which we early individuals face. So what is your take on it? What is more beneficial when you were in your early stage? I know when you joined Google, Google was just a startup. I can say it was like a startup because it was growing so rapidly.
So still a
But
few thousand, but I guess that's smaller than it is today.
it is today. Exactly. So what is your take on it, Jennifer?
I think it's very much a personal decision as to whether how you want to spend your time. Ultimately, there's not a right answer. There might be a right answer according to your parents or other people or expectations, but ultimately it's your life. And so taking control of that and going, I need it. This is your life. Well, how do you want to spend your time? You spend a majority of the day, the waking hours, working. What do you want to do? What do you want to learn? How do you want to grow? I think the challenge I often see with early career professionals is the constant need to get promoted. It's like, I used to get straight A's, so what's the next best thing? I need to get promoted. I need to get a good rating and promoted. Next one, next one, next one, next one. Yes. That you are so focused on the next grade, you lose track of, well, what am I actually learning? How am I growing? And who are the people that I'm working with that ultimately, that those are the things that you carry with you longer term in your career and your life. I think with regards to big tech or startups, there's certainly pros and cons of each that we can get into. But at a meta level, what I would say is it's more important that you know what you want, where are your strengths, and where do you want to grow for yourself, and also your personal situation may certainly factor in as well. And then looking for people who would be able to support you. Surround yourself with good people. Managers, yes, sometimes they change, but also like team members, engineering leads. Surround yourself with good people. Look for people who will support you, who you can trust. And I think that's even more important than choosing that right title or that right project. It's the people. And that's actually, even to this day, I've known folks for more than 15 years and we're like, hey, how are you? And we work together again in some capacity. I think those are the things that will carry you further in your career.
Yeah, a quick follow-up question, Jennifer, here is like, exactly, like people is really important. And that is what me and Rahul personally experienced while doing our interns in the product management domain. But when we are interviewing with any company, how do we find, what are some ways in which we can factor out that, okay, how do we find if this team is perfect for me, if this product is something I want to work? Because just 3 interviews is a very short period of time to understand if this is the right place for me to take that leap of faith or not. So what is your take on it?
And it's even harder nowadays. I think Zoom is great, but you're supposed to both assess a candidate and the candidate assess the company through a few Zoom calls. It's very difficult. I think you're very great. I would actually break it out into a few stages.
Mm-hmm.
There is before the interview, even before you have the discussions, just what mindset are you bringing into the interview context? And then there's during, and then perhaps a little bit homework after, let's say when you get the offer.
Mhm.
Before, it's actually critical that you're coming into the company with the right mindset. For example, if you're running away from a situation, like, I got to get out of here, I need to go, anything you look at is going to look better. It's just natural to think, oh, that's so much better. The grass is greener on the other side. And for all you know, you may hop only to realize, oh, ouch. And then you have to hop again. And so first is the mindset going in. If you're running, and I know sometimes there are situations where you have time limits, you have to do what you got to do. But at least as much as you can from your mindset standpoint, think, what am I looking for? And making sure to come in with that objective mindset rather than a colored mindset of it's got to be better than where I am now, or I have to get this job. That'll color your perspective of the entire process and the people that you meet as well.
Mhm.
And during the interview process, we're all people, and I would say it's kind of like interviewing is kind of like dating. There are red flags, yellow flags, which you can choose to acknowledge or you can choose to ignore. But usually those you choose to ignore come bite you later afterwards. And so I would say just be in tune with the flags, the yellow flags, the red flags. Don't dismiss it. Now, it may be that it's a false flag, which case you can investigate it, but don't dismiss it. Don't try to sweep it under the rug. You'll probably see it, but the challenge is you may dismiss it because you want that job so much.
Mhm.
And then finally, when you get the offer, if possible, to talk with folks more. Talk to the team members, talk to somebody who's not necessarily incentivized to sell you the role, and to get an honest take for what is it like to work at the company. You can certainly read reviews, but also know they may be colored, and just try to get as much information as possible.
Mhm. That's very true. That you need to not just understand the people, but also the culture of the company, because that's where you want to start your career, or maybe in some point in your career you want to join the company. But let's also talk a bit more about culture, Jennifer, because you've transitioned from Google, which is a very large organization, moving to startups. How the culture evolved during your transitions? What were some of the key takeaways for you from Google in terms of cultural values, which helped you survive in Ethos Life or Lattice?
I see. I would actually say Google, despite being a large organization, there are micro cultures as well.
Mhm.
And the culture also shifted over time or evolved, not necessarily in a good or bad way, but it grew. It grew a lot. And so therefore, how you do things and even some of the internal incentives shifted. I think what I would say is in the same way that you may empathize with your customer for your product or the end users that you are building for your product,
Mhm.
empathize with your situation and the people that you work with, and think about the circumstances at the different companies, and in particular, the incentives that are in place. So what I mean by that is at a larger organization, the incentives, let's say Google, no matter what I do, Google, I might make a dent, but not necessarily change the stock price by a huge degree, depending upon what I do. And so the incentive then may often become, well, how do I get promoted? And then to get promoted, do I have enough scope? Is there a business need? And so that naturally, the same people in that environment may work differently given those incentives, as well as the leadership incentives with this is what the leader values. They're very metrics oriented. They're very concise. They are very visionary. They want to think big, 10x. People naturally, the same people adjust. Same at a startup. At a startup, depending upon what the leader values, bias for action, or being able to be customer obsessed, that tends to trickle down. Even the incentives for what the leaders value. They want somebody who's a go-getter or somebody who's more empathetic. Those tend to trickle down as well, even if you never meet the leader. And so what I would say is culture is certainly about people, but the same people in a different environment or situation may still act differently given the incentives that are in place. Or what does it take? What's valued? And what are my incentives to be able to grow and do well at this company? And that's something that's important to look at, regardless of the size of company, is looking at what's valued and how does the leadership, what's valued, especially from a leadership standpoint.
So Jennifer, if you have to say to every product team, these are the three most important things the team should have, what would be those top three things
At the team level or in the individual level?
at a team level?
Okay, at the team level. Ooh, if I could say my ideal, I would say trust is critically important, but also very, very hard, and even harder in this Zoom environment, where you may not have ever met, or you may not frequently meet your teammates. But it is fundamental in being more efficient and being able to weather challenges as they come up and things that are unexpected. And ultimately in being able to have the discussions, the back and forth, to be able to deliver a good product. My engineering lead, one that I worked with for many years at Google, you couldn't tell that we were disagreeing. Because they'd be like, oh, okay, so you're saying this, you're saying that. Okay, well, okay, so I'm saying this. Do you hear that? Oh, okay, I see. And it sounded like, that doesn't sound like a disagreement at all. But we were actually coming at it from very different angles. But we had that trust, which also meant we didn't always need one-on-ones every single week. We could just ping each other, which certainly saved a lot of time to have that trust and efficiency. And when things came down, I was like, this makes no sense whatsoever. We can also have those honest conversations. Be like, okay, well, how do we deal with the situation then at hand? And how do we weather this? And that trust was built between us. So I would say, first and foremost, if you have a team that there's that trust, and especially amongst the leads as well, that can make things so much smoother for the people that are working together, as well as for the broader team. We've all probably worked in situations where two execs or two leads don't quite see exactly eye to eye, and that ends up with a ripple effect for the rest of the organization. And so having that trust to be able to have open conversations is critical.
So now, Jennifer, we'd also love to know some of the internal hacks or some of the tricks and techniques which help you to grow as a product leader, starting very early from your career building products to managing teams who are building products. If you can share some of the tricks and techniques which helped you to navigate the journey.
I see. I think we were just talking about this and joking about how there's a lot of material out there now around like product strategy and frameworks for product strategy, or even product requirements. And ChatGPT is actually pretty good. Some of the actual for writing the requirements. So I'm going to put those aside. There's a lot of content around that. I would actually say the thing that was critical for me throughout my career, early, mid, and at this stage, is the resilience to deal with the unexpected and to go through hurdles. Careers are rarely linear. Launching a product is very rarely linear. It very rarely goes smooth sailing where everyone's like, good idea, great experiment, great launch, great, everybody loves it. It's very, very rare. And so you will face a lot of closed doors. You will face criticisms, people who may disagree with you, but it almost feels personal when they're like, why are you doing this at the last minute? And the resilience and the persistence to push through some of these obstacles that come your way. So I'll give an example. Let's say I remember when I was launching product listing ads. This was actually one of the most proudest moments of my career, that I launched a new product with 4 engineers and myself and an eng manager. And we ended up growing it to a double-digit billion-dollar business and the majority of retail revenue for Google. That said, when I started, there was a lot of uncertainty. It was a vague idea. I remember talking to the sales teams and they were like, "You crazy? What do you mean you're not going to give advertisers a way to control what queries they show up on?" And I was almost laughed outside of the room, like with my tail between my legs going, "Oh my God, now what do we do?" Then when we started experimenting, I heard, "Oh my God, I've never seen metrics this crazy." And it was the first time we were showing images on google.com that weren't an explicit image query. So the metrics were all over the place. And again, I felt like, well, what are we going to do? They said the metrics have never looked so bad. What are we going to do? Up to the very end of the launch, I personally actually, and I hope this is okay to share, but I actually had a miscarriage 2 days before our biggest product launch. And that was a huge obstacle and a personal thing where I was like, well, was it my fault, my stress? And I had to put aside the guilt and really just move forward. And so whether it's personal, whether it's from go-to-market teams, or even your own manager, you will face obstacles. Things will not necessarily be smooth sailing. And it's that persistence to keep moving forward. It's the resilience that when you are faced with a closed door, you find another way, you find a window, you knock on the door, you jimmy the lock, whatever it takes. You also know when it makes sense that, hey, this is not working, and to take a step back. And that perspective and that resilience, I think that will carry you far in your career.
Mhm.
That's so
That
inspiring and insightful at the same time, Jennifer. Thank you so much for sharing these wonderful insights. Now, shifting gears to the next part of the podcast, that is mentorship and career coaching. So, Jennifer, I know that you have personally transitioned from a product leader to a career coach right now. So, would first love to know, how was the transition like, and what motivated you to become a career coach and a career leader?
Mm. So I have been blessed with multiple great managers, mentors, sponsors, I would say to some degree, though there's some fuzziness with that, as well as professional coaches.
Mhm.
I actually was blessed to get a budget for a coach fairly early in my career when I first became a manager. And I was really struggling with, well, what do I do? What's my value? I'm not necessarily writing the PRDs, and I'm not necessarily making some of the decisions either. So what am I? What's my value as middle management, especially in a larger organization where there may be multiple layers of middle management? And so a career coach, or actually a professional coach, was able to help me tweak my mindset to be able to say, oh, okay, I'm still adding value. I'm connecting the dots. Even if I say nothing at a meeting, I am observing, I have context here, and I'm making it cohesive across my team and our product suite. And so I would say a coach is helpful, especially an external coach, when it's helpful to have somebody to talk to where you can really be unfiltered and be able to even react to things before you figure out how you want to respond. And so a coach was helpful for me to be able to say, oh my God, this happened. Now what do I do? I can't say that to my team. I certainly can't react that way. And even to my manager, am I really going to say, oh my God, I don't know what to do? I'm probably going to filter it to some degree. I'll follow up on that. Let me look into that. And so a coach is helpful to just have those raw conversations about what's important to you, whether it's at this company or not, what's going on, to be able to get it out of your system and process things. And then to be able to think through and brainstorm and have a partner together to be able to determine, okay, how do I move forward? and they have your best interest at heart. That's more of a coach, which actually I struggled with a lot with the difference between a coach and a mentor. Because I had mentored a lot of folks. I even kept in touch with folks that I've interviewed, but I hadn't necessarily hired, but we kept in touch as an informal mentor. And what I realized is mentorship, there's more of that advice giving, or I have done it, so I'm going to help support you. There may be some of that in coaching, but coaching is more of almost like a peer-to-peer, like a support. There is no judgment. At least I don't like to judge from a coach standpoint. We all have our different goals, what's important to us. It's more of how do I help support you in reaching your goals and getting to your best self, versus a mentor maybe, okay, well, this is what I did in that situation. This is my advice that I'm going to give you. And it's more almost coming from more of that I'm telling you, or I'm sharing with you perspective, rather than more of a supporting and helping you figure out the answer together.
No, Jennifer, that's really helpful. Since we are also moving towards the end of the podcast, we would love to know from you, because there are so many coaches and mentors out there today. How can one find the right coach or mentor for someone? How do you find, okay, this person would be the right one to me to guide me throughout? How can one do that?
It depends what you're looking for. And so the benefit about coaching is that it can be very much more personal. Again, that raw, unfiltered conversation, even like reacting to type of situations before figuring out how to respond. And so first and foremost, what are you looking for? Why do you want a coach? Is it to figure out what you want to do in your life? What's important to you? Is it because you're feeling burnt out and you need support there? Is it because you're navigating a certain situation with your boss, your stakeholders, or maybe some of your peers? What are you looking for? What's important to you? And so that's first and foremost. You might want to find a coach who specializes in that, or who's had that experience, or who can relate to you with some of the situations that you're facing. And then it comes down to talking to them, sometimes even trying it out. I worked with coaches, but after a few sessions, I've said, you are great, but it's just not clicking. Or the style is not working for me. And sometimes there is a feedback, but other times it's just not a right fit. Again, it's kind of like dating. Sometimes you got to date to know what you want. And I would say the same applies with coaching. Sometimes you need to try out different coaches or talk to different people to see what resonates with you, and whether you need someone who is harder on you and will push you, someone who is more empathetic and will support you. What do you need, and what would work best for you? I don't believe in this is the best kind of coach ever. It's more of the best coach for you.
And Jennifer, following up to this question, what is the right stage of your career when you would need a career coach or a professional coach?
So I may be biased here. I would usually say earlier the better. To the extent that I'm even kind of making sure that my daughter, who's in high school, has a counselor and support in that way. So earlier, the better, because it's always helpful. There are things that she can't say to me. There are things that she may not be comfortable talking about, or it's easier to talk to with somebody on the outside about what's important for her and her goals and her career ambitions. And so anytime, the earlier, the better. That said, unfortunately, for many organizations, coaching tends to be reserved for more of the executive or the senior leadership level, at least from a sponsorship standpoint. There may be sometimes a learning and development budget you can tap into, but really professional coaches tend to be reserved at the senior levels. And so I think it gets combined to, I would say, as early as possible. But if you need to be more selective around that, then times of which you are experiencing a transition or you are experiencing a hardship, those are times when a coach can be extremely beneficial. Let's say a transition from an IC to a manager. let's say a transition on a new role where you're trying to figure things out and you need somebody to be able to talk to openly about it, or a transition from, let's say, engineering to product, or even a transition as a new executive at an organization. During those times of transitions is especially helpful to have support and have somebody that you can talk to be able to bring out the best version of you. Because it's easy, we all have it. It's easy to react. But again, it's important that you are thoughtful and you respond, especially the more senior you are. And so having somebody whom you can process things with is extremely helpful to then be able to figure out, okay, what's the best way to handle this particular situation?
Mm-hmm. Jennifer, thank you so much for all those insights. Since now we approach to the end of the podcast, any last minute advice or suggestions to early career product managers or aspiring product managers in terms of how can they navigate their career path? How do they start it? And what are some of the things from your experiences which you saw, which you faced, and now you think were okay to face those challenges to be a good product manager in the later journey? Any advice or suggestions around those areas?
I would say, so product management, there's a lot of ambitious, highly driven folks who are like, I want to be a product manager and I want to get promoted and this and that, and keep that ambition. That's great. But also keep perspective on the bigger picture. As I look back, some of the things that I obsessed over, that I stressed over 10, 15 years ago, I honestly barely remember. And so keep that perspective. One of the things that I have learned, especially in having children, they don't give me time, let's just say that, but they do give me perspective to be able to see a situation that is chaotic, that I would normally go, oh my God, the world is coming to an end. It is the worst thing ever. To be like, it's okay. I mean, that doesn't mean you don't treat it urgently, but it's okay. And so if there's anything I would say, it's just be able to take a step back. I think sometimes when you're so deep, it's hard to be able to do that, but find moments, take a walk, go exercise, go talk to a friend who's not involved in the situation, something to make sure that you are also remembering the bigger picture perspective. And that will keep you grounded through times of chaos, through times of change and uncertainty, of which there's certainly an abundance of in this market and nowadays as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much, Jennifer, for sharing that. I totally echo with the point that you need to keep the cool so that you drive the product and the team well. So you need to have a broader perspective of what you're trying to build. But all those lovely advices and suggestions, thank you so much, Jennifer, for that. We are really certain that your journey is very inspiring to a lot of listeners out there, because a majority of our listeners would be in the stage where they'll be looking for APM opportunities or early career product management opportunities. So this episode would be a good insight for them. This officially brings us to the end of today's podcast. Hope our listeners have enjoyed the episode and our discussion has helped learn something new. Stay tuned for more such exciting episodes. Thank you so much for tuning into Product Unfiltered.